Shall we begin? Let's begin now. Let's begin now.
This is not a drill.
Repeat, this is not a drill.
Is that all you got?
Let's begin now.
What up?
Craig Pasta Jardula. You'll recognize him from hosting the Jimmy Dore Show while Jimmy's on tour.
I always say, tell me one thing that Joe Biden has done better than Donald Trump. Tell me one friggin' thing. Joe Biden's going to do the whole student debt thing. No, he's not. Student loan freeze is ending. Prepare to pay up starting August 30th. Joe Biden had a chance. He had leverage when he went to talk about the debt stealing. He didn't get it done with McCarthy. He couldn't get it done with McCarthy, but he still made sure there was a pipeline of money to go to Ukraine
Thank
war
God.
and any other war they want. But student loan forgiveness,
it was worth it because they're winning.
that was their crown jewel. Didn't get it done. How many people has Joe Biden been guilty of killing?
That's right.
Joe Biden was for every single war, including the Iraq war. He was a senator with the Democrats, and he's the one who brought it to the table for George W. Bush to have his illegal war. Maui fire victims faced evictions and cutoffs. Can you imagine this? The fact that they're sending all this money, they're arguing to send all this money to Ukraine, and they won't even help these people out. They don't have money to help the citizens who lost everything, but they have money to fund war. We're going to be here every Tuesday and Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern. And now remember, it's time for Pasta to Go. Yeah, welcome back to the show, everybody. Craig Pasta Jardula is here in the building. Pickup show on a Wednesday. We normally don't do this show at this time. It is 2 o'clock Eastern. But we had to do our LOL, our laugh out loud. No, left on left criticism show because there's so much stuff going on. And it's so relevant to today. Even that opening over there, you know, I always say, tell me one thing that Joe Biden did better than Donald Trump. And we have to discuss this because it's very, very important. So without any further ado, let's bring in the professor, Jayme Kuzmarov, the author of many books, including that warmonger book that's right behind his shoulder and next to his beautiful face. Jayme Kuzmarov, the professor, is here with us. How you doing, Jayme?
Pretty good. How about you?
I'm doing good. I'm going to set a stopwatch now because now we know exactly. I don't think we should. A timer should be better. We know exactly how much time we have to get into this stuff, and what our segments have to be. If you're listening out there on the radio, thank you so much. I think this show is so important, Jayme. There's so many reasons why we have to do an LOL segment, left on left criticism, and we do it. And we do it as we laugh out loud to keep ourselves from crying. But there is some important things out there, too, to discuss. Right now, I think the best thing to discuss before we get started on this segment is who is really the lesser of two evils, right? We're sold this two-party illusion, right, that we need to get out of. So when it comes right down to it, and I've said this before, Donald Trump or Joe Biden, and I had a friend of mine, he used to be a friend of mine until the Israeli situation popped off, and, you know, he's anti-war, but, I mean, this whole Gaza situation with Palestine has really made people show their true colors. He's not really talking to me at this moment right now because he's so upset about my opinions about what's going on. But it is important, I think, to point out the lesser of two evils here, and I would say it openly that Donald Trump is the lesser of two evils. And I only say that not to encourage people to go vote for Donald Trump, because I'm not going to vote for Donald Trump. You know, I'm going to vote third party, and our election system is whacked as is. But is it okay to say that? Is it a fair assessment to say, Professor, that Donald Trump is the lesser of two evils? And even though we are leftists and traditionally the Democratic Party has been the party of the left, we have to just simply stop supporting these warmongers. I mean, World War III is closer than it's ever been, and it's with Joe Biden in office, not Donald Trump. Professor.
Well, I mean, it's a matter of opinion. You know, people may have different opinions on that issue. There's certainly a phenomenon of Trump derangement syndrome, which I think is dangerous, to blame all problems in American politics on Donald Trump. I think that's what we see, you know, in the MSNBC crowd. You see that even in the Nation magazine. And, you know, to think that, you know, the reelection of Joe Biden is going to be, you know, saving the country, I don't know. He's brought us into disastrous conflict in Ukraine that's seems to be escalating. The military, I have an article coming out on China, and, you know, the U.S. has been reviving runways from World War II and all these Pacific islands, and signing agreements with the governments of those islands and investing billions of dollars to revitalize runways so that they can, including in Tinian, which is where the Enola Gay bomber flew to attack Hiroshima. So, I mean, clearly they're planning for a war with China. and Biden is signing off on these huge military budgets. So, I mean, he's certainly a cancer. I mean, you can make a strong argument Trump is a cancer as well. But the Trump derangement syndrome focuses only on Trump, when I think the problem in American politics are systemic. It has to do with the corporate takeover of government, the way elections are funded. And I think people on the left and progressives have to challenge that and not just be fixated on Donald Trump.
Well said, Professor. Well said. I do believe that too as well. I mean, listen, some people think it's a lost cause. A lot of my friends said voting is a lost cause. Electoral politics is a lost cause. They think it's better if we just get out to the streets and just do what we have to do, because we're never going to change anything with elections, especially when they present, not only just our election system, the framework and the processes that we have to deal with. And I mean, some people just came back from Russia and talking about some of their elections. Wow. I think people have to understand why Putin got 87% of that vote. It's very, very important to analyze that. And I think if we had the same type of representative here in America, that person who would be for America, not for the corporations, and hand us this lesser of two evil argument, which we're going to break into it. The guy we're going to talk about today is Bernie Sanders, right? Who constantly says these things. Let's play the first video right off the bat of Bernie Sanders once again selling that same thing. Donald Trump, Professor, is the most racist, misogynistic president of all times. And if we don't stop him and we allow him to get in, then we are all doomed. We are letting fascism in the door, and it will be a big problem. I mean, look at where we're at today. Look at what we're getting. And if we still continue to play, there's an old saying, you play cocky games, you're going to win cocky prizes, right? I have to say that because we can't say the curse words, but it's the truth, man. I mean, how long are we going to continue to play this what game? It's awful. We have to hold the line somehow. And I know a lot of people are going to still throw that out there. There's people out there like David Pakman, Randy Rhodes, these free speech television people, right, that are not about free speech. They're sitting there supporting a party that is in the bag for censorship, for silencing us. A party that's run by the CIA. I mean, both parties are two wings of the same vulture. But let's play this Bernie Sanders clip real quick and give me your thoughts, Professor, on this continued rhetoric by Bernie Sanders.
This election is of extraordinary importance in so many respects. It is important because we are running against the most dangerous political figure in the modern history of this country. And I just want to make it clear to people what a Trump victory is about. I think sometimes we slouch it off. Trump does not believe in the concept of climate change. So what does that mean? It means not only that all of the work we have done in trying to transform our energy system away from fossil fuel will be undone, but every other country on earth is going to say, hey, if the second largest emitter in the world is given up on trying to transform the energy systems, we're not going to do it either. And that really means dooming our kids and future generations to a very, very unhealthy, perhaps uninhabitable world. So you don't need to know anything more than that to understand how dangerous Trump is. But obviously, the danger is much greater than just that.
I had somebody call me once, Jeremy, try to sell me the argument, and I was trying to search for that argument of where is Biden actually better than Donald Trump? In my announcement, my intro for Pasta to Go, I talk about it all the time. Name me one area where Joe Biden is better than Donald Trump. Now, I think you can make the argument maybe for Latin America, right? Donald Trump exiting the Oval Office just last week there, he labeled Cuba a state sponsor of terrorism, which was totally just crazy and off the wall. I mean, there's like 2 knife stabbings a year there in Cuba. It's a totally different society. And he did continue the same policies that, Barack Obama had in play, and Bill Clinton and George Bush and everybody who's been so awful with, supporting the Monroe Doctrine in Latin America, which is really leading to our migration process. Root cause. I know people are saying, well, they destabilized that country. Now they're going to destabilize our country. Root cause, baby, is what's going on. And we have to just address this and hit this on the nose. Let's bring up the next article really quickly before we get the the professor involved, and it talks about Franklin Delano Roosevelt, because I think that at one point you can make the argument, and don't get me wrong, I mean, I met Fiorella Isabel when I was doing the Bernie Sanders campaign, and we were together in the streets marching for an economic path to, sovereignty for workers in this country, right? We didn't get involved with the culture wars, and we understood that race was an issue, but we understood the biggest thing on the table, the biggest thing on our plate was these economic wars, right? And giving people money, giving people a livelihood, making it okay so people can make a living would ease the race tensions in this country, Professor. But I mean, Bernie Sanders claims the mantle of FDR, who was once again a pro-worker president, or is at least perceived to be. Has he really earned it, though? And I want your opinions on that, Professor, because I think that was the angle. And I think there was also a big difference between 2016, when he would go into West Virginia and talk to Trump voters, and then 2020, he bought all into the culture wars. He completely bent the knee to the Democratic Party. There was that whole situation in 2016 when he told people to go vote for Hillary Clinton, and they were booing him. And he went, brothers and sisters, please. And they were booing him for the first time on that campaign trail, because I think a lot of people expected him to go into the convention and fight. That's what he told us we would do, and he didn't fight. He instead bent the knee. Your thoughts, Professor?
Yeah, I would agree with that assessment. I think he might have been more effective. He claimed to be leading a political revolution, and then really it was clear that he was just trying to draw his supporters into the fold of the Democratic Party and to support the corporate Democrats. And now, yeah, he's using this kind of fear mongering about Trump and the threat of fascism to get people to vote for a Democrat when the party's not delivering. So a lot of people see that he kind of sold out. I mean, he might have been much more effective since they railroaded him, running as an independent or situating himself as an independent and leading a real revolution against the corrupt two-party system, and really trying to revitalize the democracy and encouraging social activism and the regeneration of social movements in America to fight for some of the principles he was advocating for, like free healthcare system, and challenge to the corporate oligarchy. And I think he'd been very weak throughout his career on foreign policy issues, and that's what I go into in this article, because I compare him.
Kosovo, right?
Yeah, Roosevelt and Wallace. Franklin Roosevelt, and especially he's especially bad on Russia, because Franklin Roosevelt was a visionary who restored relations. The Woodrow Wilson administration invaded Russia after the Russian Revolution, poisoned U.S.-Russian relations. But Franklin Roosevelt was a visionary who restored positive U.S.-Russian relations in 1932, furthered that cooperation in World War II, then supported the Yalta Agreements, which is a spheres of influence agreement after World War II that would have paved the way for world peace and no Cold War. Henry Wallace was Roosevelt's vice president, trying to continuing that policy. He was removed in basically a coup d'etat in the Democratic Party. And ever since, the Democrats have supported a hard line on Russia. And Sanders has continued that. This article has all these statements he made condemning Russia, promoting Russophobia, supporting NATO expansion, supporting a hard line against Russia, and he voted for military aid appropriations to Ukraine. He was among those standing and cheering for the tyrant Volodymyr Zelensky when he came and addressed the U.S. Congress. And I mean, that's another area of sellout, because there's such pressing social needs here at home, and to achieve the goal of like a free healthcare system, we shouldn't be investing billions of dollars in Ukraine, but Sanders evidently thinks we should, and you can't have your guns and butter, and Bernie doesn't seem to understand that. So he really doesn't live up to Roosevelt and Wallace, who were really visionaries and promoted a peaceful relations with Russia as a pathway to a peaceful world order.
And everybody should go check out that article by the professor in his amazing Covert magazine. Go check out Jeremy's work. I mean, the article we're going to get into later is just so juicy. We talked about it before this show. It's a juicy article, and that's what Jeremy produces, juicy articles. All the information is there. It's like an encyclopedia of knowledge. And, just kind of going back to what you're talking about, Bernie Sanders, I remember him in 2016, and the link is in the chat, by the way. Remember him in 2016 when he was talking and he was doing, I think it was a CNN town hall. I'm not sure what it was. But he starts getting into this kind of bashing of Donald Trump, and he stops and he goes, ah, right? Like he stops there and he goes, ah, throw it aside. Like let me stop. And I'm not going to sit there and bash on this guy. I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do for you, the worker, how I'm going to help you out. And it was this genuine moment. It was like why we all looked at each other and said, this is why we're supporting Bernie Sanders right here. This is why, we're getting behind him. But the question I want to ask you really quickly before we get into the big question, because I think the litmus test for a lot of leftists is Israel, Palestine, right? You pointed out certain things and applauding Zelensky and whatnot. And, when you heard people talk about Bernie Sanders and Israel, and so much of the 2016 election, nobody had to answer questions on Israel, Palestine. 2020, nobody had to answer questions on Israel, Palestine. I was constantly following the Tulsi Gabbard campaign. I wish I could get into a time machine and go back and question her right there on the spot. And that was the whole thing that RFK had to deal with. I mean, I caught RFK in New Hampshire way before October 6th, and I asked him his question on Israel, Palestine, right, his situations, his stance, and that was front and center. And a lot of these politicians have had to be front and center when it comes to Israel, Palestine, is when 2020, 2016, Bernie Sanders really didn't have to answer for his stance on Israel, Palestine. But before we get to that, I mean, do you think that Bernie Sanders was threatened in any way? I mean, there's that famous Donald Trump video when he was talking about, Bernie Sanders is the only guy I didn't want to run against. Was Bernie threatened to bend the knee like this? And this is coming from our good friends at Indy at INN. And I was going to ask that question anyways. That's what great minds think alike. But Donald Trump in that famous video, when he talked about the only guy he didn't want to run against was Bernie Sanders. I mean, he talks about a moment when Bernie Sanders are all of a sudden straighten up and fly right when he did. And, Donald Trump says, well, they got him in the locker room. They told him what's what. And there was also all of a sudden all these threats to maybe put Jane Sanders, his wife, who we know, I love my wife so much, threatened to maybe put her in jail for all that malarkey going on with funding that she maybe have taken for the whole school scandal, and I think they kind of framed it as, Donald Trump people going after her, but it seemed like the establishment was going after Bernie Sanders. Do you think Bernie Sanders was threatened? You also have the black eye theory from the truthers. Do you think he was threatened? Does that justify his position nowadays? I mean, he's only human if they say they're going to kill one of your family members or something or do something harmful. Jeremy, Professor, what do you think?
Well, I don't know about that. I've heard that rumor also about Robert Kennedy, that they have something because of his sex life or maybe connection with Epstein, and that's why he's adopting such a hard line on Israel and is in support of Israel and has compromised himself. I don't know. These are theories. I don't have any proof of them. It wouldn't surprise me, but to learn about it. But I don't know. I mean, what we've seen in Bernie throughout his career, though, is that he's actually a very cautious and calculating politician. I mean, I think he was actually used by the Democratic Party to bring younger people into the fold of the party because the party was growing stale with Clinton and some of the leaders they had. And here was this kind of populist rabble rouser, and people were following him. And he had a track record going back to his time at Burlington mayor of fighting for certain progressive causes. So he was actually a very effective instrument of the Democratic Party. So I think he was working in collaboration probably with the elites all along. It was just kind of a charade. I mean, a lot of politics is a charade, and politicians are good actors, really, the good ones.
And it's only minimally effective when they do this thing, right? Like we were seeing RFK's rally the other day. It's not as many people as it once was. I mean, Dennis Kucinich was on TV at one point talking about his campaign, and it was going like this. Then we had the Israel-Palestine situation, and the plane flattened out and was slowly kind of on an angle going down. Now with this pick of VP, it's like, he's done. I mean, he's done. I don't even understand, like, even the people, and don't get me wrong, the things, her biggest issues are very important. And with things I were excited about, RFK getting to speak and changing the rhetoric on the campaign trail. Let's talk about our food. How it's processed, how it's made, how it's poisoned, how we're a sick nation. I mean, he spent a history of taking on a lot of the industry itself and exposing them. But now you're going to pick somebody who was the ex-wife to the creator, I think it was Moskowitz, I'm not sure, of Google, and also somebody who has ties to Event 201. What are you doing? And she's not popular at all. I mean, I guess the wooing of of Tulsi Gabbard, the wooing of Tulsi Gabbard by the Trump campaign. Come speak at Mar-a-Lago. Speak about the radical left. I mean, she had a little thing going on at Mar-a-Lago. But let's play this first video right here. Let's get into because I don't want to waste any time. You mentioned the sheep herding by Bernie Sanders. Yeah, but when I was saying it only works minimally, because a lot of us were like, we're not playing your game. We're out. Goodbye. We're never going to go bend the knee to the left, the Democratic Party the way you do, because it's not a leftist party, and Bernie Sanders was the compromise candidate at that point. Like you said, calculated moves when it comes to foreign policy. So he was the compromise. We were willing to deal with his bad decisions of the past, especially of Kosovo, right? But we weren't going all the way. So it only works minimally, the sheep herding and whatnot. I think RFK is more about crushing, like Sam Husseini says, more about crushing the anti-established movement and splitting it in half, because we have people, anti-imperialist leftists like myself, who were going together and bonding together with a lot of these, populist right who were against the COVID protocols and understood it for what it was and looked at it as a bioweapon. I mean, we didn't believe it came out of bat soup in Wuhan. But I mean, him is more about crushing a movement, and Bernie Sanders could be that. We're just throwing theories out there, but I think it only works minimally, Professor. But let's get into some of the stuff you brought to the table, because we only got a limited time here. Let's talk about Bernie Sanders and his decisions about Israel. Here's Norm Finkelstein. We'll play a little bit of this, and we'll stop it as it goes along, and we'll get the professor's opinions about Bernie Sanders on where he actually stands on Israel-Palestine. Here we are.
Just clarify one thing, Senator, if I might. You support a humanitarian pause in Gaza. Some of your fellow progressives say that there should be a full-on ceasefire, which would require an agreement on both sides to halt the fighting. Do you support a ceasefire? And if not, why not?
Well, I don't know how you can have a ceasefire, permanent ceasefire, with an organization like Hamas, which is dedicated to turmoil and chaos and destroying the state of Israel. And I think what the Arab countries in the region understand, that Hamas has got to go. So.
Okay. My name is Norm Finkelstein. I heard Bernie Sanders statement this evening opposing a ceasefire. I had planned to spend this evening reading, except fallen dreadfully behind in my reading. And unless I keep reading, I can't bring anything fresh and important to what's happening now. But I was so furious at that remark of Bernie's, where he said he opposed the ceasefire, and my innards started to writhe.
Okay, pause it
And
right
I
there.
decided,
Let's stop it right there. I mean, we unfortunately, since we have a limited time in a segment, and Norm Finkelstein moves at the speed of cheese, very slow, we have to give our own analysis. But Professor, you can see Norman Finkelstein say right off the bat, like he had other things to do that day, but he had to stop to go into this. What is this humanitarian pause that these politicians keep throwing out there? I mean, what is a pause? Pause means you're just going to stop for a second and go back to doing what you're doing. And also, Hamas. Your thoughts, Professor?
Well, yeah, it's kind of a cop-out by politicians. They don't want to actually, cut off arms supply. I mean, to get Israel to stop its horrendous atrocities against the Gazan population would require a ceasefire, would require halting weapon supplies, it would require imposing sanctions or an embargo on Israel. As actually Dwight Eisenhower imposed sanctions during the 1956 Suez Crisis that forced Israel, as well as Britain and France, to back off when they tried to invade Egypt after Nasser had nationalized the Suez Canal. So there are things they can do, but it's a very cowardly position, and that's what Finkelstein goes on. He calls Sanders a coward, that he won't even call for a ceasefire, let alone harsh measures against Israel that could actually block it and save many lives. We're talking about, thousands of human lives at stake here that could have been saved. So it really is an act of political cowardice by Bernie, and that's why Finkelstein was upset. But it fits within his career. Jeffrey Sinclair of Counterpunch wrote a very good book on what he called the Sandernistas, and he went back when Sanders was the mayor of Burlington. He was evicting anti-war. He brought in the F-35, and then when he was a senator, in Vermont, he brought in plants to manufacture the F-35, and he was quicker than his predecessor to throw out the anti-war activists out of his office. So,
oh yeah, he was, and at the town hall too as well when he had them shush. Put up that article, the Bernie and the Jets one, really quickly, just so we can take a look at it. Where we got about 2 minutes and change left of this particular segment, but Hamas. Can you give us a little bit of thoughts on Hamas? Because first of all, I mean, listen. One of the best things that when I was on the Jimmy Dore show and I was hosting was with Kurt Metzger. Was like, here they are, Netanyahu, and is early back as 2019, saying in a meeting with all his politicians and his lawmakers over there that they have to fund Hamas. And he's like, and just to think about it, I gave up on Hamas in 2014, and here it is, Netanyahu still has faith in them right now. But people still throw this Hamas argument out there. I've heard. What's her name? Rashida Tlaib talk about we don't support Hamas and stuff like that. People are very small-minded when it comes to Hamas. Can you give us your thoughts on the cop-out about Hamas? And the fact is that what choice did a lot of the people in Palestine, especially in the Gaza Strip, have when supporting Hamas as opposed to, what are they supposed to do? Say no to Hamas and support their oppressors, which is the Israeli government? Go ahead, Jeremy, Professor.
Well, I mean, I think there are ugly features of Hamas rule that would be legitimate to criticize, but Finkelstein makes the point in that talk that they're not addressing the root cause. They're making like Hamas just woke up one day and wanted to attack and kill Israelis. And I mean, there's been a process for years where the Israelis, have laid siege to Gaza and brutalized the population that would facilitate their anger. And also when Hamas won, I mean, this was facilitated in 2006. Hamas won elections that were held, and they were punished collectively as a population for electing Hamas. And it's also forgotten that the Israeli leadership, Netanyahu and others in the Likud party, supported and empowered Hamas because they didn't want to deal with the Palestinian Liberation Organization.
Yeah.
They didn't want a peace process. They walked out of it.
This is something that Ron Paul says on the floor too, Jeremy, right? I don't mean to interrupt you, Professor, but this is something that Ron Paul says on the floor way back when about the fact that they're supporting Hamas. We can't do that. Listen, the timer is up. You can hear the bell going. So we just need your final words right now. We understand Bernie Sanders where he was on foreign policy. We understand where he is when it comes to Russia. We understand where it is when he supports Zelensky. We understand right now where he is when he kind of uses the Hamas excuse and the humanitarian pause. So, Professor, I just need your closing words on Bernie Sanders. Sell out for real or same old, and why it's important that we don't play this stupid game because we don't want to win stupid prizes. Close it on out, Professor.
But I would say people on the left, should not look to false messiahs for their deliverance, but should develop independent social movement, independent of the two-party system, and work for change in their communities and in developing broad mass-based movements that could change the outcome of U.S. politics and not devote themselves to false messiahs like Sanders or AOC or Robert Kennedy or any of them.
Yeah, that's it. You play stupid games, you win stupid prizes. You heard it right from the professor's mouth. That's it for this segment. We'll be right back. We got one more segment. We got to talk about this Russia situation. I am Craig Pasta-Jardula, the captain, here with the professor, Jeremy Kuzmarov. You're listening to LOL. We'll see you right back. Welcome back to the show, everybody. I am Craig Pasta Jaradula. We are doing the LOL time, baby. The left on left criticism, where the left critiques itself and laughs out loud to keep itself from crying because it is some sad situations. And I think this is a very important thing that we have to talk about, Professor, because people are still playing the stupid games and winning stupid prizes, and we're getting, we have nobody coming into this next election, right? Coming up, RFK, he split the anti-establishment movement right in half, right? There were people like ourselves who were consider ourselves old school leftists, old school liberals, if you will, common sense leftists, whatever you want to call us. But we're all about freedom of speech, freedom of a press. We're anti-imperialist. That's what we are. And I think there's a lot of us that have merged together with the populist right. And don't get me wrong, too. I think that's a trap door to go into this populist movement, too, on the right, Professor. But I think it's so important that we get this information out there right now. There is no criticism of the left because, you're told, and people like David Pakman are out there right now, and Randy Rhodes, and saying it's stupid to vote for third party. People like Tom Hartman who play these stupid games and really want to sell you, Kyle Kulinski, want to sell you that the left, right? Like, we have to vote for Joe Biden, Professor, because he is the lesser of two evils, and at least we'll get something out of it. No, we keep going backwards, and it's even more dangerous than I think than the small gains we'll get, because I can't even really look at the small gains and actually say they are gains. Your thought on that before we get started in the next segment?
Well, yeah, I mean, people should think for themselves. It's not for me to tell them what to do. There are difficult decisions in elections, or any podcast host, but I would favor third parties. I go back to the late 19th, early 20th century, the first Gilded Age, because I think we're in the second Gilded Age now. And in the first Gilded Age, you had a similar situation where you had two corrupt political parties that lacked legitimacy, that were not enacting laws to the benefit of the population. Politicians were bought off by plutocrats. And you had new political parties that emerged that revitalized American democracy, notably the Populist Party and the American Socialist Party, which adopted platforms to benefit working people, to redistribute wealth. Those parties gained a lot of supporters and influence. They got members into Congress, into local legislatures, into city government. They had newspapers. This contributed to the revitalization of American democracy in the progressive era. And the major parties were forced to adopt their platform. And they even the Democrats recruited the Populist Party leader, William Jennings Bryan, who ran for election in 1896 for the Democrats and became Secretary of State. And he tried to keep the United States out of World War I. So I think there are great positives that came out of the third party then, and I think that's what we need now.
Yeah, well, I think if anything, it just lets the two-party illusion, right, the establishment, know that we're not going to play their games anymore. So let's get rolling. We got 25 minutes. Let's hit the clock. I'm going to put it up there right now, and we'll get rolling. Welcome, everybody, to LOL. Laugh out loud, kind of. It's left on left criticism, where we do laugh out loud to keep ourselves from crying. I am Craig Pasta Jardula, the captain here, your host, along with the professor, Jayme Kuzmarov. And we're breaking down today what's going on with this whole terrorist attack in Moscow, and drawing the parallels and letting people see on how it's so similar to what we witnessed in the initial military action from Russia and Ukraine. And Jayme, I think a lot of the people, they were sold a bill of goods on this situation. Now, let's put up your article, because I think your article is awesome. It is juicy, guys. If you don't know, Jayme writes for Covert Action Magazine, right? What is your actual title over there, Professor?
Managing editor of Covert Action Magazine.
Boom. And this one, like I said, these articles that he writes are very juicy. The one that we're talking about right now is the CIA director, William Burns, capo of the world's biggest spreader of lies and misinformation, is spreading the lie that Russia's invasion of Ukraine was unprovoked. I've gone as far as, if you can get that up there, right there. No, get the title in there. Let's show the title there, CheeseSlice. I've gone as far as saying, and I've gotten in trouble about this before, I've gone as far as saying that not only was it not just provoked, it was justified. right? I mean, they didn't get in there to start a war. They got in there to stop a war. And we got to realize what happened in 2014. And you can go back further than that. I'm sure, Professor, you can lay out some examples on how the United States has always meddled in Ukraine because it was one of those countries that was split. You know, part of the country fought with the Nazis in World War II. The other side of the country, the east side of the country, fought with the Russians, the Communist Party, the Soviet Union against the Nazis. So it was always a country that's been split for quite some time. And the United States has always used that to their advantage for a proxy war with the Russians. And if they can bleed them in any way they could, like they did in Afghanistan by supporting the Mujahideen to fight the Russians, they're going to do so, right? Because there's some of these people who are lost in that Cold War mentality, especially the people who are in charge right now, the Vicki Newlands, who are married to Robert Kagan, the Jake Sullivans, the John Kirbys, you know, the Antony Blinkens. They are anti-Russian advocates to the nines. And this article does so much to talk about the spreading of information that it was unprovoked. And I want to lay it out because I think this draws so many parallels to what's going on in this Moscow attack of today that just happened last weekend, right? I mean, I'm a poker player and I have a lot of poker analogies, Professor. And what I would say is that the United States has so many tells. And if you watch the movie Rounders, you know, Mikey sees Teddy KGB has a tell when he gets to the Oreos. And he tells when he's got a hand. And Mikey discovers that tell, so then he knows when to fold and when to bet. Well, the United States has tells all over the place. Do you want to give us some insight, Professor, onto why it was not unprovoked? And in your thoughts, if you even, in fact, like me, think it was justified. Because I'm not a big, you know, once again, I'm not an ideologue. I don't go around wearing I Love Putin t-shirts, even though we had them and we wore them as a joke to kind of troll the Democratic Party at one point years ago. But it's not the fact that I'm just so pro-Russia, even though I think there's a reason why we have to analyze why Putin got almost 87% of the vote over there, and he does so much for their country compared to what we have over here. But it's the fact that the United States always wants to do these things to start the wars, and then they would do what? They go lie to the public. Professor, please.
Yeah, well, people can ask the question: what would happen if it was in reverse? If Russia had had made a promise that they wouldn't expand the Warsaw Pact military alliance into Mexico and Central America, and then they started doing that. If Russia had initiated a coup d'état in Mexico and against a leader that was friendly toward the United States, and installed a leader that was very hostile to them, and if there was a secessionist movement that was threatening to break away in parts of Mexico, and then the Mexican government with heavy Russian funding attacked the people there and killed 10,000 people, how would the United States react?
Yeah. This is so important to talk about because there are people out there, and don't get me wrong, listen, Scott Horton, I like the guy a lot. When I spoke at the Rage Against the War Machine rally, and you were there too as well. I had a little get-together the day before, and you saw what I was trying to do. I had libertarians in the room, populist right people in the room, leftists in the room. Misty was there. You were there. Kyle, who's a libertarian. So many people. Clint Russell. All these different types of people of different ideologies, of different teams getting together in one room saying, where can we come together? How can we build bridges? That's what I'm all about. That's why I started this show, and I wanted to do so. And I think it's important for us to critique our own side. But there are certain people like Scott Horton, who was the first person to congratulate me when I got off the stage. We had bonded. I got him some Dr. Pepper cotton candy because he was a Dr. Pepper guy. And I remember him disassembling Bill Crystal, right? Just tearing Mr. Crystal apart while having a Dr. Pepper in hand. Now a lot of people are boycotting and not drinking Dr. Pepper because of the Gaza situation. But still, it was kind of fun. I brought him some Dr. Pepper cotton candy. Nonetheless, when he came on the show, there are a few things that I disagree with him. One of the things I disagree is the fact that he thought that there were other options for the United States. Let's get that next video ready too as well, because I don't believe there were any more options. I believe they exhausted every single options. Minsk 1, Minsk 2. We found out they were lies, where the United States was just supplying the Ukrainians to go in there and cause a serious war. But even people like Claire Daly, right? But this is Joe Biden over here. And once again, this is the tell, Professor, right? You have in that article from the CIA, William Burns article, how the bombing was increased 9 days before the Russians went in there, leaving them no choice. And there are a lot of people in Russia who thought that Putin dragged his feet. Even Yanukovych, as he was fleeing the country, told Vladimir, hey, man, you're going to have to get involved in because they're going to arm Nazis. And these Nazis will fire on their own people in the Donbass. They don't care. That's why the United States, who has a history of arming all these radical groups like the Mujahideen, like the Contras in South America, Latin America, Central America, that is, they constantly do it. So here is Joe Biden, once again, tipping his hat, in my personal opinion, Professor, and giving the tell, saying that they're going to go in. We have intelligence. No, they left Vladimir Putin and the Russian Federation no choice but to go in there and protect these people in the Donbass from a slaughter. Here's Uncle Joe, and then we'll get your opinions right after, Professor.
Made a decision on whether to invade. Do you feel indication about whether President Putin has made a decision on whether to invade? Do you feel confident that he hasn't made that decision already?
As of this moment, I'm convinced he's made the decision. We have reason to believe that.
You are convinced that President Putin is going to invade Ukraine. Is that what you just said a few moments ago?
Yes, I did. Yes.
So is diplomacy off the table then?
No. Until he does, diplomacy is always a possibility.
What reason do you have to believe he's considering that option at all?
We have a significant intelligence capability. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
All right, so there it is. It's a significant intelligence capability. Your thoughts, Professor, on that? Is that really the intelligence coming in, or is it we're going to force his hand by ramping up the bombing? And in that CIA director article, you show the intensified bombing 9 days before. In fact, there were some people who said when the Russians came in, like, thank God you were here because we were about to get slaughtered. Professor?
Yeah, I think you hit it on the head there, that this was a deliberate policy to draw the Russians in, that they were going to provoke them into a war, that the neoconservatives in Washington wanted this war. And I think the mastermind of this strategy, although he was no longer alive, was Zbigniew Brzezinski. He was also the mastermind of the U.S. strategy in Afghanistan in the 80s, where he bragged about drawing the Soviets into the Afghan trap by supporting the Afghan Mujahideen, the most violent and extremist elements in Afghanistan, to subvert a pro-Soviet revolutionary government in Afghanistan. And it was known that that would draw the Russians into Afghanistan. And the goal was to bankrupt the Soviet Union. And he thought this was such a successful strategy, even though it cost who knows how many Afghan lives. And it resulted in the rise of Islamic terrorism that were financed and trained by the United States. And similarly with Ukraine, it was used to draw the Russian in. Yeah, these provocative acts were taken because Putin was an independent nationalist. The U.S. had wanted the continuation of the Boris Yeltsin government of the 1990s. Yeltsin had basically opened the Russian economy to foreign multinational corporations that were starting to gain control over Russia's rich natural resources. And Putin was supposed to continue that process, but instead he started to reclaim Russian control over its own economy and to strengthen Russia. And the neoconservatives wanted to dominate the entire Eurasian region.
Absolutely.
And that's what Brzezinski advocated for in his book, The Grand Chessboard.
Yep.
And after the fall of the Soviet Union, they thought there was a great opportunity. So they had to ruin Putin. And the way to do it was to draw him into a quagmire in Ukraine. That's why they're going to keep up this war, even though it's an unwinnable war. Their strategy is to just bleed the Russians, harm their economy, and ratchet up sanctions. Yep. Although Putin circumvented it because he's adapted well to the sanctions by drawing closer to China, trading with India. Iran.
It backfired on the United States and their plan. I think of that song when I think about Bill Clinton and Boris Yeltsin. And that was listen, after Kosovo, I think that was the reason why a lot of hardliners in Russia said, okay, we got to get rid of this fall down drunk. And we got to pick somebody who is going to be very balanced, but not let the United States walk all over us. And that's how Putin came to power. At the end of the day, I always talk about socialist governments like in Nicaragua, right? Like it's a collective government. They have no choice but to pull together their resources and their power, their manpower, because the United States wants to go in there and take everything away from them, including their resources and their sovereignty. And I think about that song, like I was talking about, by the Police. You'll be wrapped around my finger. And that was Boris Yeltsin with the Clintons. He was doing everything they wanted him to do. But I still want to point out a fact, because this reminds me, this is Claire Daly over here, and I love Claire, right? She is amazing. She is fire. I love Mick Wallace. I got to meet him in Nicaragua during the elections. These people are awesome. But sometimes it's a slippery slope. And when I hear this rhetoric, it makes me think, Professor, when all these people are saying, yes, Assad is a brutal dictator, but no, you're playing crap games again, because now you're setting a rhetoric in which no matter what, you can't justify what Assad's doing. You can't justify what Putin is doing. And here is Claire Daly doing the same thing that everybody falls into the trap. And then I want to get your opinions on it right after. Here's Claire.
Exactly 18 months from the start of the war in Ukraine, or Russia's unprovoked war of aggression, as it's called repeatedly on our airwaves, repeated time and again, which kind of gives you a clue that the war actually was provoked. That doesn't mean that it was justified. Russia had no right to invade the sovereign territory of Ukraine. This was 100% illegal, but it was provoked. And unless we understand that, then there can be no solution to the conflict that takes place, that is taking place.
All right, let's pause it right there. Professor, is this a dangerous type of rhetoric over here? I said before, you play crap games, you win crap prizes. It seems like it's a quagmire, and you're setting yourself up for failure if you say, oh, it's an unjustified war, but it was provoked. It seems like you're contradicting yourself in the same sentence. And like I said, I love Claire, and she's not the only one guilty of this. I felt Scott Horton was guilty of this. I felt a lot of people in the Libertarian Party, friends of mine, would say, yeah, Putin's awful, but no. It was to stop a war. It was to stop a slaughter. Do you see the dangers of having that type of rhetoric when you already kind of set a standard in which that person is awful, but I mean, it kind of lessens your argument that the United States needs to stop doing what it's doing. Go ahead, Professor.
I would say so, yeah. I think it's important to look at it from a Russian point of view. It was a war of self-defense because the United States was going to use Ukraine as a base to promote regime change in Russia. And I mean, we see that Ukraine had been launching attacks into Russia now. They've been carrying out assassinations in Russia. So no country is going to tolerate that. And ethnic Russians were being slaughtered by the Ukrainian military and neo-Nazi Azov battalion. So I would agree, it does undercut that this was a war of American aggression, really. And I think the New York Times made that point clear when they had this expose a couple of weeks ago about how Ukraine transformed itself into a base for the CIA after the Maidan coup of 2014, with at least 12 CIA bases set up there, and they're training Ukrainian commandos. So, yeah, I think the anti-war movement should be very strong in condemning U.S. action and aggression in Ukraine and triggering this conflict.
Yeah, and also, too, in your article, that juicy article, like I said, Jayme Kuzmarov, the professor, his articles are juicy as can be. It's like a 3.5-hour smoked brisket that comes out that is tender as can be, but when you squeeze it, the juice is still coming on out. He mentions those biolabs. For my truther friends out there, I'm not forgetting about you too as well. But another reason why Putin said, enough is enough. You got bioweapons labs all over the place. We already saw what happened with the COVID-19. We're not going to sit there and play games. Was it came out of a wet market bat soup? Was it the Chinese? Was it the Americans? Certainly had American funding. And now you got bioweapons labs all over the place. And there's an argument that they've been trying to make certain bioweapons that are specific for certain races. And Putin was not going to sit back and say, I'm going to allow this to happen on my border. Let's go to the Moscow massacre of today. We just laid out for you, ladies and gentlemen, the United States tipping its hat. They have a tell. They went in there. They increased the bombing. They had all this stuff going on. In my mind, leaving the Russians no choice but to go in there eventually after they tried Minsk 1, Minsk 2 to come to some type of agreement and realize that was nothing but a stall technique. Well, we have this massacre in Moscow that we saw the other day. And, for some of us, it's very easy. Immediately we said, What is the United States involvement in it? The CIA has their fingerprints all over it. If it is ISIS-K, well, we funded ISIS-K. We supported and created ISIS-K. How much blame is it on us? If it's the Ukrainians, as the Ukrainians go, the United States goes. So here is Mr. John Kirby, right, talking about before it happened, hey, Professor, stay out of, music halls, venues, and stuff like that. Listen to this.
I've also seen, hopefully you saw our State Department or embassy there put out a notice to all Americans in Moscow to avoid any large gathering, concerts, obviously shopping malls, anything like that, just for their own safety. They should stay put where they are and stay plugged into the State Department for any additional updates and information. I'm afraid that's really all I have on that.
Thank you. So question, did the U.S. have prior knowledge of this attack in Moscow, given that the U.S. Embassy had issued warning beforehand?
I'm not aware of any advanced knowledge that we had of this terrible attack.
Wow.
March 8th, the embassy warns of imminent attack in Moscow by extremists.
Yeah, I think that I'll let the State Department speak to that. But I don't think that was related to this specific
Play dumb.
attack. I've also
All right,
seen
play dumb. There it is, right there, Professor. And we got more, right? Not just that. It's like, hey, dude, did you have an ace? No, I didn't have an ace. I saw your card. You had an ace, right? You had an ace. Don't lie to me. I saw it. I mean, this is a tell. Also, there's one more, Professor, and I'll get your opinions. And the big question is, do you think the United States has its fingerprints all over it? Let's listen to Vicki Newland, who's no longer there anymore in the State Department and has been resigned or retired or whatnot. And she just keeps coming back like a vampire. How can we miss you if you don't go away, Vicki Newland? Listen to this, Professor.
With this money, Ukraine will be able to fight back in the east, but it will also be able to accelerate the asymmetric warfare that has been most effective on the battlefield. And as I said in Kyiv 3 weeks ago, this supplemental funding will ensure Putin faces some nasty surprises on the battlefield. With this money,
she said 2 weeks ago, Professor, we got some surprises for Vladimir Putin. And that's when she showed up when Zaluzny, the general of the forces in Ukraine, was sacked by Zelensky, and they were having a back and forth. She had to go there and solidify the fact that Zelensky's still in charge and Zaluzny was out. But your thoughts is there fingerprints from the United States all over this attack? And I'm going to throw a little bonus question in there for you. I think United States people, citizens, are very privileged. The fact that we don't have many attacks on our own soil. Should we now be concerned that the United States, there could be an attack on our soil?
Well, on the first question, my instinct would be, no, they can't do something like that. But then having studied history and seen them done it many times before, that this is the group that bombed the Nord Stream pipeline that had been supporting assassination within Russia, they would stoop to anything, even something ghastly like that. And I mean, we know that the Tajiks, in the past, the CIA has recruited Muslim Islamic elements in Chechnya and Tajikistan. In fact, they've used Tajiks in Afghanistan to fight against the Taliban. So that leaves open the possibility that these Tajiks, through a third party, had some financing or training from the United States. And they would use, that comment about nasty, it just showed what kind of nasty person she is. I mean, she wants to just spread mayhem and death. And that's our government is taken over by these ghouls. And there's been a program to try and destabilize the Russian government. Scott Ritter had an article about how the U.S. CIA and Ukraine were supporting far right-wing paramilitary elements to try and promote destabilization around the time of the election. So this could fit with a larger strategy. And then there's the pattern in American history. Yeah, and I think Americans have to fear their own government. With these ghouls running the government, the American people are in grave danger from their own government. And we've seen that historically, whether it's the Pearl Harbor incident where the Japanese were deliberately provoked and the Roosevelt administration and George C. Marshall withheld information from naval commanders in Hawaii, allowing that attack to go forward that killed 3,000.
They wanted that attack. They wanted that attack. They wanted it. Well, listen, different times, different places. Now we have nuclear weapons. I think Putin once echoed, and I think it was Albert Einstein who originally said this, right? World War III will be fought with nuclear weapons. World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones. And that's what we're facing right now. You know, the number one job of the United States president should be to keep us out of war with Russia. It seems like they want to get us into a war with Russia. And I want you to answer the second question. But before we do, let's play a little Scott Ritter, since you mentioned him, Professor, and what he is saying. Listen, Scott Ritter said in short, and we're going to play this little clip here, and we'll stop it because it's a long clip. But he said in short, the Russians know everything. They didn't apprehend or arrest these guys right away from the Moscow massacre. They let them drive, and they have their phones, and they have their communications. So they know. But to me, you're going to F around and find out if we keep doing this. How long could we sit back and say that it's not inevitable that there'll be an attack on our own soil? Let's listen to Scott Ritter. We got a couple minutes left, and give us your thoughts on what he has to say.
President Vladimir Putin has just finished delivering an address to the Russian nation about the horrible events that transpired yesterday at the Crocus City Hall and concert venue outside of Moscow. A terrible terrorist attack that has killed hundreds, and the death count is still being tallied. The president spoke forcefully. He spoke directly. He spoke about the resilience of the Russian people. He spoke about the absolute destiny of the perpetrators, the harsh justice that will be meted out to them. He also made a comment about how the attackers fled towards Ukraine. Now, the Russian president made it clear that there is an ongoing investigation and that the Russian intelligence and security services will get to the bottom of this. But let's talk about that aspect, that the attackers were fleeing towards Ukraine.
All right, that's good.
You know, there has.
So he went on to talk about this, and as the days transpired, Scott had mentioned that the Russians have everything. They know, they understand. And listen, for us, it was like, United States, fingerprints all over this, right? So we have a minute and change left of the segment. Professor, please answer this question, your thoughts on the fact that the Russians know everything, and should we be as concerned about an attack on American soil? How longer could we keep doing these actions and not expect something to happen here at home? Go ahead, Professor.
Well, yeah, and obviously it's telling if they were heading to Ukraine. And yeah, in general, as I said, the American people unfortunately have to fear their own government, who's involved and is doing the exact opposite of what they're supposed to do. Their mandate is to protect national security, and they do the exact opposite, triggering conflicts all around the world that will benefit the arms makers, and it leaves the United States ultimately vulnerable to some kind of attack in the future.
Yeah. And do you think it could happen on our own soil, or do you think that's like possible that it won't happen? You know, I mean, I'm not talking about Pearl Harbor or Guam or a couple bases in the Middle East. I'm saying right here on the mainland. If we're going to go in there and we're going to send the most radical of radicals to kill civilians in a concert hall, what's to stop them, Professor?
Well, and particularly if they want to trigger a new war with China, you know, they're building the military apparatus for that. They want to, you know, contain China, keep China down, ensure another century of American dominance in the Asia Pacific. It would require some kind of major attack on American soil for the public to get behind the war against China. So they could very easily engineer something, and we should be fearful of that.
Yeah, I think so too, Professor. And I don't know what the antidote is and what we should do, but we need to start holding this government accountable here. American citizens need to get to the streets and get in front of these people's faces and let them know, no more. No more, Professor, will you put our lives in danger. It's bad enough that you put all the world's lives in danger, but something's going to happen here. The chickens are coming home to roost. That's it for the show today. Ladies and gentlemen, LOL, laugh out loud, or left on left criticism, where the left critiques itself and does it with a laugh so we keep ourselves from crying. I am your host, Craig Pasta Jardula, the captain, along with the Professor, Jayme Kuzmarov. We'll see you on the flip side. Thank you, Professor, and thank you out there. Remember, we're saving the world one meal at a time, but now it's time for pasta to go. right, that's it for today, guys. No super chats, no super raise. Remember, if you want to support the show, we got a Patreon. Everything is listed down below. I got some cooking going on in that Patreon. Different levels of support. Macaroni and cheese level for $2. Fettuccine Alfredo level for $5, and a lasagna bolognese level for $10. Each section getting a different thing for you out there, including a live stream in which you can come into the kitchen and watch me cook and converse with me. So thank you so much. If you want to help out, there's also a Give, Send, Go. We need your help. Independent media is only strong when citizen journalists get the backing from you. So we'll see you later. Thanks for getting out there. That's the Pasta to Go fundraiser. Help us out if you can. Independent media needs you. We love you. We'll see you soon. Peace out. Special thanks to Jayme CheeseSlice on the 1s and 2s and Joey Cicada. We're out. Peace.